It started with a number, $50,247. That was the total when you finally sat down and added it all up. Student loans, credit cards, car loan, a medical bill you'd been ignoring for 8 months. You knew it was bad. You just didn't know it was that bad. It didn't happen overnight. It never does. It happened in small decisions over years. A student loan at 18 that felt like free money. A credit card to cover groceries when things got tight. A car payment that seemed totally manageable at the time. And a hospital visit that insurance only partially covered. Each one made sense in the moment. Together, they became $50,000. Here's something nobody talks about. Before you fix it, there's usually a period where you just try to outrun it. You picked up extra shifts, not to pay down the debt, just to make sure the minimums cleared each month. You stopped opening certain emails. You got good at the mental gymnastics of knowing something was wrong without letting yourself know exactly how wrong. You told yourself you'd deal with it when things calmed down, when you got a raise, when the year turned over. There was always a reason to wait. Meanwhile, the interest kept running. Every month you paid the minimum on the credit cards, the balance barely moved. Sometimes it didn't move at all. You were on a treadmill, moving constantly, going nowhere. One night you looked up how long it would take to pay off the first credit card making only minimum payments. The answer was 11 years. You closed the browser tab. You can't always explain the moment things change. It doesn't usually come with music. For you, it was a Tuesday. You were eating lunch alone and you opened your banking app, something you normally avoided, and you looked at the numbers. What was coming in, what was going out, what was left. And something in you went very still and very clear. You thought, I made this, which means I can unmake it. Not quickly, not painlessly, but it is possible. The debt did not arrive on its own. It was built, decision by decision, over years. And it could be taken apart the same way. You finished your lunch, you went home, and that night you sat down with a notebook and looked at every number without looking away. You stopped spending on anything that wasn't essential. Not forever, you were clear about that. Temporarily, with a defined purpose. The streaming services went. The gym membership went. You started cooking every meal at home. You stopped buying coffee out. Small things, but they added up to almost $400 a month that hadn't existed before. You picked up weekend work. Saturdays became work days. You sold things you hadn't used in years. Old electronics, furniture, clothes. Everything became a resource. The first month you paid extra on the debt. It felt almost pointless. The number barely moved, but it moved. The second month, it moved a little more. You kept a notebook where you tracked the total every Sunday. Not because it was exciting, it wasn't, not yet, but because you needed to see it going in the right direction. The medical bill went first. It was the smallest. The month you made the final payment, you sat in your car for a minute before going inside. Just sat there. One thing gone, 4 to go. It sounds small, but something about seeing a balance hit zero for the first time did something to the way the whole thing felt. It wasn't dread anymore. It was closer to a project, something you were working on, something with an actual end. Then the second credit card. 8 months. There were months where you almost broke. A weekend trip you said no to, a jacket you really wanted, a Saturday you just wanted to not think about it. You didn't break. The first credit card took another 6 months after that. By this point, something had changed in how the whole thing felt. The student loan, the big one, had been sitting above $20,000 for years. Slowly, month by month, it started to move. Not fast, but the direction had changed. It was going down. You were making it go down. You checked the total every Sunday. 50,000 became 44, became 36, became 28. The car loan finished. 16,000 left, then 9, then 3,200, then 0. You made the final payment on a Thursday morning before work. You'd been watching the balance for 3 weeks, building toward it. You typed in the amount, you hit confirm, you watched the screen reload. 0. You didn't throw a party. You didn't cry. You made yourself a coffee and you sat at the kitchen table, the same kitchen table where you had first added it all up. And you thought about the last 2 years and 4 months, the Saturdays, the trips you hadn't taken, the small daily choices, hundreds of them, all pointing in the same direction. It was done. You sat there for a while, then you got up and went to work, because the next part had already begun. The strange thing about finishing the debt is that the habits didn't disappear. The extra income was still coming in. The careful spending was still there. But now, instead of going to debt, all of it was just sitting. You had never really learned what to do with money that wasn't spoken for. So you started from scratch. You built a real emergency fund first. 6 months of expenses in a savings account you didn't touch. For the first time in your adult life, an unexpected cost wouldn't mean debt. It would just mean using the fund and rebuilding it. That feeling, a real buffer between you and the world, was something you hadn't expected. It felt like being able to breathe. Then you found index funds, not through some brilliant insight, through an article, through weekends of reading, through slowly understanding that you didn't need to pick stocks or time markets. You needed to buy a small piece of everything consistently and let time do what time does. You opened a brokerage account. You set up an automatic transfer on payday before you could spend it every single month. The first month it felt like almost nothing. But you understood now how compound growth worked. You understood that the enemy of wealth isn't bad luck. It's time you've already spent not starting. 2 years after the debt hit 0, you checked your investment account on a Sunday morning. The number wasn't life-changing, but it was real, and it was yours. And it had grown without you doing anything except not touching it. Your emergency fund was full. Your monthly contributions were automatic. You had started thinking about longer things, not just surviving the next month, but where you wanted to be in 10 years, in 20. The questions that used to feel pointless had become real questions with real plans behind them. You weren't rich, you weren't finished, but you were no longer in the hole you had spent years digging and years climbing out of. You were standing on flat ground, building upward. The kitchen table was still there. You sat at it most mornings now. Sometimes you thought about that night, the piece of paper, the number, the weight of it. You were glad you hadn't looked away. You took a screenshot, not to show anyone, just to mark it. The way you used to mark the debt going down every Sunday. The same ritual, different direction. Your emergency fund was full. Your monthly contributions were automatic. The system ran whether you thought about it or not. For the first time in your adult life, money was doing something while you slept. You had started thinking about longer things, not just surviving the next month, not just making the minimum, but where you wanted to be in 10 years, in 20, what you actually wanted your life to look like when the numbers weren't the whole story. The questions that used to feel pointless, too far away, too abstract, too much like something other people got to think about, had become real questions with real plans behind them. You were building something. You just weren't entirely sure yet what it was. You weren't rich. You weren't finished. But you were no longer in the hole you had spent years digging and years climbing out of. You were standing on flat ground. And flat ground, after what you'd been through, felt like standing on top of something. You went to dinner on a Tuesday, not for a reason, just because you wanted to, and you could, and there was nothing on a spreadsheet telling you that you couldn't. You ordered what you wanted. You didn't calculate it against anything. It was just dinner. That was the whole point. And then, on the walk home, something else. You passed a park bench, 2 people sitting on it, laughing about something from years ago from the look of it. The easy laugh of people who have known each other long enough that the story doesn't even need to be finished. You slowed down. Just for a second, you got home. You sat at the kitchen table, the lamp on, coffee made, investment account doing its quiet work in the background. Everything was in order, and somewhere in the middle of all that order, you noticed something. The years of debt had taken so much attention, so much energy. Every weekend, every decision, every Sunday night had been pointed at the same target. Now the target was gone. The money was moving in the right direction. The system was running. And the apartment was very quiet. Here is what nobody tells you about the years you spend fighting your way out of something hard. The debt is gone, but time moved while you were paying it off. People moved. Relationships drifted in the quiet, practical way relationships drift when someone is always working, always saying no, always pointed at a single thing on a spreadsheet. You had been so focused on fixing the one thing that was broken that you hadn't noticed the other things shifting around it. The apartment was clean. The account was growing, and you were sitting at the kitchen table at 9 p.m. on a Saturday with nowhere to be and no one expecting you anywhere. You weren't sure exactly when that had happened. You weren't sure it was something money could fix. You picked up the phone, not to check the account, not to move money or set a transfer or look at a chart. You called someone you hadn't spoken to in 2 years. They picked up on the third ring. You said, "Hey, it's been a while." They said, "Yeah, it has." And then one of you said something small, and both of you laughed. And for a few minutes, the kitchen table felt less like a place where you tracked numbers, and more like a place where a person lived. Here's the thing about money. It solves the problems that money solves. And those problems are real. The dread of opening the app, the weight of the minimum payment, the feeling that you are permanently behind. Money solves those. And solving them matters. It matters more than people who haven't felt them can understand. But money doesn't call you back. It doesn't sit across a table from you and laugh at the thing you both remember. It doesn't notice when you're quiet. The account was growing, the system was running, and you were learning slowly that the other work, the rebuilding of the things that had gone quiet while you were paying off the debt, that work didn't have a tracker. It didn't have a Sunday ritual. It was slower and less measurable and in some ways harder. But you were starting it, and that felt like something. The kitchen table was still there. Same lamp, same worn surface, same spot where you first wrote $50,247 on a piece of paper and felt the floor disappear. But tonight there were 2 mugs on it. You weren't tracking anything. You weren't planning anything. You were just sitting with someone, talking about nothing important. The way you used to before the years of debt made everything feel urgent and solitary. The account was still growing. It would keep growing whether you thought about it or not. That was the point. That was always the point. But this was something the account couldn't do. And you were glad you were starting to remember that. You were standing on flat ground. The debt was gone. The account was growing. The emergency fund was there. And the things that money couldn't buy, the people, the mornings, the easy laughter over nothing, those were coming back too. Slowly, the way they had left. You weren't finished. You weren't sure you ever would be. But you were no longer in the hole. And sometimes, on a morning like this one, you thought about the night you sat alone at that table with a piece of paper and a number that made you feel like the floor had disappeared. And you thought, good that you looked, good that you didn't close the laptop and go to bed, good that you let yourself feel the full weight of it before you started to carry it differently. The city was waking up. So were you.